Hello guys, and welcome to the Unreal Engine 5 Blueprint for Advanced Users. This is the follow-up video to my Unreal Engine 5 Blueprint for Beginners, and I highly recommend you watch that video first before you try and follow this one, because I teach you the basics of blueprints and how to use them. In this video, we will go over some more advanced topics in Blueprint, such as enumerations, structures, and arrays, and we will use all three of these to create our very own simple custom items inventory system that you see here in the video. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing that you'll need to do is go ahead and download the project files. The link will be in the description below. And obviously, if you have Unreal Engine 5 installed, early access, go ahead and launch. Then we're going to head over to games and create a third-person project. We can just name this Blueprint Part 2. Go ahead and click create. Alright, so first of all, we're going to talk about the fundamental parts of Blueprint, such as variables, and more specifically, enumerations, structures, and arrays. So first of all, we'll start with the enumeration. So if you remember, in our character, right-click, edit third-person blueprint. So this is our third-person character. If we remember from our last video, we created all sorts of different variables. And in fact, if I create a variable here, and we click on the variable type, you can see all the various variable types. Now, there are actually these other variable types. We have enumerations here, object types, interfaces, and structures. And what we're going to be focusing on is enumerations and structures, as well as arrays in this video. So first of all, let's start with an enumeration. Go to your content browser, create a new folder, and we're going to name this _main, just so we can keep our little project here organized. And in our main folder, we'll right-click, create a new folder called enums. Alright, and we can double-click that folder. And in here, we're going to create our first enumeration. So if we right-click, we can go to blueprints here. And you're going to see here, we have blueprint class, blueprint function library, blueprint interface, blueprint macro library, enumeration, and structure. So we're going to create this enumeration. So we can name this test enum. We can double click and open it up. So what you see here is the enumeration creator. And basically, we have our enumerators. So these are the list. And then the description for each enumerator. So let's go ahead and create a new enumeration in here. So we click this new button. And you're going to see the display name and the description. So really all that matters is the display name. So in this case, what we want to do is type in is walking, and then we'll create another one, and then type in here for the display name is flying, and then click new, and type in is swimming, and finally click new, and maybe we'll do is sitting. So basically, an enumeration is simply a user-defined option. So it's like sort of like an option menu. And to see this option menu and to set it, what we're going to do is go to our third-person character and go to our variables. So we can go ahead and create a new variable. Name this character state enum. Okay, so in here, we're going to go over to the variable type, and here we can search our test enum. So right there, click on that, and you're going to see it's of the type enumeration. And once we hit this compile and save button, it will let us set the default value. So this is basically what enumeration is. If you click this down button, you're going to see the options that we defined. We have the is walking, is flying, is swimming, or is sitting. So basically, this is what an enumeration is. It's a list of options that the developer can define, and you can use this in pretty much any part of your game. Any part of your game that you want some sort of custom variable that allows you to have different options. Alright, so this is great and all, but how exactly do we use this in our game? So we'll go ahead and show you how you could really quickly utilize this in your game. Okay, so what we'll do is right click and add a F key. So when we press F, what we want to do is click on our test enum and drag it onto the graph. And we want to get character state enum just like that. And so what we can do is we can left click off of this node and type in switch on test enum. So you just type in switch and select this. And what you're going to see here is the different settings that we have. So first, let's hook up the pressed execution pin to the switched on test enum. And what you're going to see here is basically when we press F, depending on what we've set our variable type here, depending on our character state enum, so you can see is walking. If it is set to is walking, it's going to fire off this execution pin right here. All right. And if we were to set this to is flying, it's going to set this execution pin right here. So that means that any logic or any nodes that we put past this are going to fire depending on whichever setting that we set it to. So let's go ahead and test this out. So is walking, what we can do is hook up a print string. So remember, this is where we can print stuff to our screen so we can quickly debug and know what's going on. So what we want to put in for here is character is walking. Okay, and we'll go ahead and copy and paste this, Control C, Control V, and hook up this to is flying and change this to character is flying. And we'll go ahead and do the same for is swimming. Hook that up. Character is swimming. And of course, I just realized I spelled swimming wrong. So you can actually go back and test enum and fix that. Save, and it's going to change it and update it right there. And then character is sitting. And just like that. Okay, so right now our current state is set to is flying. So if we go and hit play, we can press F on our keyboard and you can see in the top left, character is flying. Okay, so we can go ahead and basically add another key and modify our current state. So we can modify this enumeration and it will fire off different logic. So for example, we'll add a E key, scroll up here. Okay, so when we press E, what we can do is drag off of our test enum here onto the graph and click set character enum. And we'll hook up the pressed here and we'll set this to is walking, just like that. Okay, and then we'll add another key like the Q key. And we'll drag our character state enum and set this to is swimming. Okay, so if you remember, we press F to print our thing, E, now our character is walking, Q, now our character is swimming. We can change our enumeration to walking, Q, we can change our enumeration to swimming. So this is basically enumerations in a nutshell. You have these user-defined settings that you can create, and you can do a switch on enumeration to have different logic based on this user-defined setting. Alright, so we can go ahead and delete all this and delete our character state enum. And what we're going to do now is create a new folder called structs, or in this case structures. So in our structures folder, we can right click and we're going to blueprints. And down here at the bottom, we have structure. So we'll go ahead and click on structure. Okay, and what we want to do is rename this to test struct. And then we can go ahead and double click it to open it. And in here, you're going to see the structure creation. Basically, it's the same as the enumeration, but in this case, a structure is essentially a group of variables. So you can see here we have one variable, which is a Boolean. And so basically what we can do is we can create a group of variables. And what we can do is add a new variable here. First of all, we'll change the first one to, say, text. And what we can do is change this to player name. So this next one, we can change this. We can leave it as a Boolean. We put something like is dead. Create a new variable. Maybe we want to create it as a float and name this to health. And then we'll add another variable, change this to type integer, and change the name to level. And then finally, one more variable, we can change this to the type of our test enum. And we can change the variable name to character state. So if we save that, we'll go into our third person character and we'll add a new variable. We're going to name this character struct, just like that. And in the variable type, we're going to change this from byte to test structure, what we named it here. And then we can compile and save it. So here you're going to see the default value. And if we actually expand this, you're going to see all the different variables that we defined. So we have the player name, which is a text. So we can enter in smart poly, whatever your name is dead is a Boolean, so we can check it true or false. Health, we can set something like 100 HP. Level, we can set to maybe level 25. And then character state, you can set to is walking, is flying, swimming, sitting. So basically, this is a structure. This is a group of variables. We have the text variable, the player name, is dead, which is a Boolean, health, which is a float, level, which is an integer, and character state, which is our enumeration, custom enumeration with different states. So essentially that's what a structure is. It's a group of variables to store data for your game. So we can actually go ahead and take our character struct here and drag it onto our graph and click Get. And so what this will allow us to do is to access all of this data here that we've added. So to do that, what we want to do is add a F key. And when we press F, we want to print our stats. So we want to first drag off of our character struct. And you're going to see here at the very bottom, we can do break. And so we're going to click on break test struct. And what you're going to see here is if we expand this little down arrow, you're going to see all of the different variable types that we've set here in our character struct. So you can see we can get the player name, we can get if they're dead or not, their health, their level, their character state. And basically you can check and do certain functionality. So if you remember, a Boolean is a true or false, so we can drag off of here and do a branch. When we press F, hook this up to our branch and check to see is the player dead or not. If they're not dead, we can go ahead and do a print string and print out their stats. So in this case, we can print out their name. And you're going to see is convert the text to the string. We can copy and paste this. And we can print out their health. And then we can also print out the character's level. And then finally, we can print out our character's state. So you can see here, when we press F, we're going to get the structure. We're going to break the structure so we can get all of the data and access all the variables. And then based on some of the variables on here, if the player is not dead, then we want to go ahead and print all the information out. So if we hit play, we hit F, you're going to see our current state is walking, our level is 25, HP is 100, and our name is Smart Polly. So that is one way that you can access the variables in a structure. Another thing that you can do is you can actually set the variables in a structure. And to do that, you would simply take the character structure, set the character structure, then drag off of it. And what you want to do is right here, make test structure. So if you hit this little expand down button, you can see we can actually make and set all of the variables in here. So actually what we want to do is we can go ahead and alt click to unhook that, drag this up here and hook up the press. What we want to do is we want to set our character struct to something else. So for example, we could do something like Joe is dead is true, their health is now 0, their level is 30, and their state is sitting. And then we can hook this up to our branch here. And if we hit play, you're going to notice nothing's happening. And that's because we actually hooked up the is dead. And nothing's happening if the character is dead. In this case, our character is dead. So we can either switch the pins there, or we can uncheck this. And it will let us print it. So I'm just going to go ahead and uncheck that, and then if we hit play, we can hit F, and you can see the structure data is being set. So we're setting it to Joe, HP is 0, level is 30, and state is sitting. So you can see we can set the variables in a structure, and we can also get the variables in a structure. Okay, so another thing that is useful to note is, let's say you don't want all of these variables. You can actually hit this down arrow right over here and unpin some of these. So we'll hit Alt and click some of these. Let's say we only want the player name is dead and health. What we can do is click hide unconnected pins, and we'll automatically hide the pins that we don't need. Or we can check the pins that we do need. So those will allow us to get the data that we only want and modify the data that we want to modify. So that's a brief overview of structures. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is delete all this, compile, save, close our test structure, and in our content browser, I'm going to go ahead and hit this dock and layout. We're going to create our item structure as well as our item enumeration. So first of all, we go back into our main folder. In our enums, we're going to right click, add a new blueprint down here, enumeration. We're going to name this to item type enum and double click this to open it up. We're going to add 3 new enumerators. So up here, we're going to rename this to consumable. So these are the different item types. First, we have a consumable item, so like a health potion that can restore health. Then we have an equipable. So this is like an item, like a weapon or a sword. Okay, and the third one is a readable. Okay, so this is our item type enumeration. Basically, we have the different item types. We have consumable, equipable, and readable. And based on these different item types, we can do different logic. So let's go ahead and create our structure, our item structure with that item enumeration. So back in our main structs, we're going to right click and add a blueprint structure, and we're going to name this to item struct. Go ahead and double click that. And in our item structure, we're going to define all of the variables that we need for our item information. So we can add things like the item name, the mesh, the amount of damage that it could do, the item icon, and things like that. So the first variable in this case is our item type enumeration. And we're going to change the name here to item type. Then we're going to add another variable, and this is going to be static mesh. So if you scroll down here, you're going to see object types, and we're going to click on the static mesh object reference. I'm going to change the name here to mesh. And what a static mesh object reference is essentially we can set this mesh reference here to anything we want, to any, in this case, static meshes that we have in our game. So we have a cube, a cone, any static meshes that we import into our game, we can set this variable reference to that mesh. That is essentially what a object reference is. All right, next up we'll create another variable, and this will be of the type integer. I'm going to name this to damage. So this could be if we had a weapon, we could set the damage here. We'll add another variable, and we can set this to text. And we'll go ahead and rename this to item name. So this will be the name of our item. Then we'll add another variable called texture 2D. And you're going to click on here the texture 2D object reference. You're going to rename this to item icon. So the item icon, just like our static mesh object reference, in this case it is a texture object reference. So we want to set the item icon texture. Okay, and we're going to add two more variables. First one will be of the type text, and we can rename this to item text. So in this case, for our item readable, we can put information here that's going to be either about the item, or in this case, in the case of the readable item, like a book, we can put the text that's going to be in the book in this particular variable. All right, the last variable we're going to hold off on creating because we actually need to create the blueprint for it. But basically, we've created our first item structure here. And so you can see here we have the default values. So we have our item type, our mesh, the damage, the name, icon, and item text. So we can go ahead and close out of that. And now what we want to do is we want to create our item blueprint. So if we go back into our main folder, we're going to right click and add a new folder called blueprints. We're going to right click and add a new blueprint class. And this is going to be of the type actor because we want to create an actor such as an item that can be spawned into the world. So we'll go ahead and create a new actor, and we're going to name this to BP underscore item master. Okay, BP because it's going to be a blueprint, and then the name item master because it's going to be the master class. So if we double click on it, all right, so now that we're in here, what we want to do is create a new variable, and we're going to name this to item stats. Okay, so we want to change the variable type here from Boolean to our item structure. Okay, so we can compile it and save, and now we've created our item master class with our item structure variable. And in the default value here, you're going to see all of the information. we're going to see all of the stats that we can set for our item. So we can set the item type to consumable, equipable. We can set the mesh of the item, the damage, all that good stuff in this structure. So we actually don't want to set the variables in our master class just yet. So let me show you what we have to do next. So next, let's actually add a mesh for our item blueprint and a sphere collision that we can use to allow the character to pick up the item. So first what we want to do is click add here and search a static mesh. So we'll go ahead and select static mesh, and we can rename this to our item mesh. So for our default item mesh, we could set this to a 1 meter cube, just like that, just so we have a default item mesh. And then we're going to click add again, and we can add a sphere collision. We can drag the sphere and drag it onto the default root and click attach, just like that. And then we can go ahead and click R and scale up our sphere like that. And click compile save. And go back into our third person example map, and we can actually drag in our item master just like that. And we'll go ahead and actually scale this down a little bit. So in our item master, we'll go ahead and scale down. And our item mesh can be scaled down like that. So compile, save that. That looks a little bit better. So back in here, right now, what we can do is we can set, if we click on our item stats, our item info right here. But we actually don't want to do this in our master class because of a few reasons. First of all, if we want to create additional items, the issue with this is what we're going to have to do is right click and click duplicate. And the problems with duplicating a blueprint is the fact that they're going to be separate, different blueprints entirely. And the downside to that is when you have, like, say 100 different items and you scale this all the way up, your character is going to have custom logic per each item blueprint because there is not one master item blueprint. So what this means is if you're casting or trying to communicate with the blueprint, you have to do it for each different individual blueprint class. So in this case, if we added a health potion, we're going to have to separately cast to our health potion. If we had a sword, we have to separately cast the sword to our armor class, to our pickups class, to whatever blueprint class and whatever items we create, we're going to have to cast and basically copy the blueprint nodes over and over for each individual blueprint class. And as you can see, it's going to be a lot of code and a lot of work. So the way to avoid this is by creating a child blueprint. And basically what a child blueprint is if we right click our blueprint master item, we're going to see here at the top we can create a child blueprint class. And you can see here we've created our BP item master child. In this case, we can right click and rename this to BP underscore item book. And so we can double click our item book here. And the first thing you notice is that it's almost exactly the same as our item master class. The only differences between our item master and our item book is the fact that you can see here on the left, our components are showing that they are inherited. And what this means is it's talking about inheritance. And basically, when you create a blueprint class and you create a child, the blueprint class that you created the child from is essentially the parent. So you have a parent and a child. Basically, our item book here is inheriting everything from the parent class. So as you see here in the top right, our parent class of our item book is our item master. So that is inheritance 101. And basically, inheritance allows you to create children of certain blueprints so that you can have the variables, components, and information in the child blueprints and inherit all of the functions, all the variables to create different instances of those blueprints. And this is what Unreal Engine is actually built around. And what I mean by that is I can demonstrate this by right-click, create a new blueprint class. You can see here we have the basic layout of inheritance in Unreal Engine. So first of all, we actually have an object, and an object is the first parent object in Unreal Engine. So it goes from object is a parent, and the child of an object is an actor. So an actor is an object that can be placed into the level. And then from the actor, we have a pawn. So a pawn technically is an actor that can be possessed, so it can move around either by a controller, an AI controller, or someone who is playing as the pawn. Then from the pawn, we have a character. Our character is the type of a pawn that has the ability to walk and move around. So you can see the character is inheriting the pawn's ability to be possessed, which is inheriting the actor's ability to be placed in a level, which is inheriting the object class ability to basically exist in the engine. So that is essentially the basis of the Unreal Engine framework, using inheritance and actually object-oriented programming. And hopefully I didn't confuse you in any way. If I did, leave a comment down below and hopefully I can explain it better. This is how the framework of Unreal Engine is built around. It's built around parent and children classes. So in this case, we've created a parent and a child. All right, so what does exactly mean to be a child blueprint class? So in this case of our item book, we inherit all of the different components like I said before. And in this case, we actually cannot delete any of these objects. So it means we can't actually delete any of the components here, any of the variables or functions. But what we can do is we can actually change the variables settings as well as override the variables and functions inside of the children class. So for example, if I wanted to change the item mesh to a sphere, I can do that. I can actually move this around as well. So I can move stuff around like this. And if I drag this item book in the level, you're going to see it's entirely different. The child class is different from the parent in the case that we've changed the components, we moved them around, and we changed the mesh. So if I undo that, basically that means that we can set any of the values here to whatever we want. We can set it to whatever we want, but we cannot delete it. So that is essentially what a child can do. All right, so before we go any further, what we want to do is we want to import our project files. So go into your content browser here, and into our main, we're going to add a new folder called Resources. And in here, we're going to, first of all, make sure you download the project files. The link will be in the description below. And you're going to have to right-click and unzip the project files. And in here, you're going to have two folders. We have the 3D models, book, hatchet, potion. Then we have the icons, the item icons. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to, in our content browser, you want to create a new folder called Resources. And in there, right-click, create another folder called Item Icons. In here, we can go ahead and select all of our icons and drag them into our item icons. Then back in our resources, we can right-click, create a new folder, call this Item Meshes, and we can go ahead and go to our 3D models, Item Meshes, and for our book, we can create a new folder for book, and drag open it up and drag all this into our book folder. You're going to see all these options. Basically, you can just leave this as is and click import all. You see this message log, no smoothing group here. You can ignore this. This is just a warning that pops up with every mesh that you import. You're going to see the little texture things pop up there saying that it's been imported as normal map and so on. That's all fine. Now we can go ahead and go back into our item meshes and import the second item, which is our hatchet. So we'll go ahead and create a new folder called Hatchet. Double click that, and in our hatchet we can go ahead and select these files and drag and drop it into our content browser. Leave all the settings as is and click import all. Okay, and then we have our warnings. We can just click OK. And lastly, we're going to go back into our item meshes, create a new folder, and rename this to Potion. Back in our 3D models, we can click on our potion here and drag the models and textures and click import all. Okay, and we can ignore these error issues. All right, so now we have all of our resources and our content imported into our project. What we want to do is set up the textures real quick. So for our potion texture, we can go ahead and open up the material and drag and drop our texture into our material like so. You can select this and delete it and hook this RGB into the base color and then save that as is. Alright, and that should update our potion material just like that. Then back in our item meshes, hatchet, we're going to open up the hatchet material here, this Lambert one. And these models, I got these off of Sketchfab. I didn't create them myself, so I linked the Sketchfab creators in the description below if you want to check them out. But basically you can use these for commercial projects. You just need to credit the original creator. Okay, so in our material here, we want to shift select these textures and drag it over to our material like so. And we can select this and delete it. And we can drag our diffuse or albedo, hook up the RGB to the base color. Our second map here is our metallic. We can hook that up into our metallic. And then for our last one, we can hook this up into the normal. So we can hit save there. Then lastly, we'll set up the book materials. So in the book, we can select on this material and we can go ahead and shift select our textures and drag this into our material. And here we can hook up this albedo to the base color, hook up our metallic to the metallic, our normal map to the normal map, and lastly our ambient occlusion to ambient occlusion like so. Okay, we can go ahead and save that. And now we should have all of our meshes with the materials all set up. Okay, and so then now that we have our resources in here, we can start creating our different item types. So if we go back into our main and into our blueprints, we have here this item book. We can go ahead and open that up. And so for our item book, in our BP item book child class, we want to set our item mesh, to this case, the search book. So select book here, click R and scale this down a little bit. I'm just going to set this to 0.2 and enter 0.2 or 2, compile, save. If we delete this item master and drag our item book, maybe we'll scale this up a little bit. So we'll scale this up to 0.3, 0.3, 0.3. All right. So now we have our book mesh just like that. All right, now we want to set the actual item information. So one thing you may notice is you don't know exactly where the item info is. So if you remember in our master item, we can't find the item stat structure. So where exactly is this variable? It's not exactly in here. So what you want to do to get the variable from the item master class is you want to click here to class defaults. So what you're going to see here in the class defaults over on the right is item stats. So if you hit this down arrow, you're going to see our item stats structure and all the different variable types. So basically any variables that we create inside of our master blueprint class, they're going to be inherited to our child blueprint class, and those variables are going to be in the class defaults under the default value right here. And this is where our variables are going to be stored from our parent class. So what we're going to go ahead and do is set our book item stats. So in this case, we're going to change the item type to a readable. We're going to change the item mesh to this book mesh. Our damage is going to be 0 because we're not going to really be using that at all for a book. Item name, we can change this to old book. You can really set it to whatever you want. The item icon, we want to set it to the project file icons that we've imported. So if you search book, you want to see here T_book texture. Going to select that. And again, if you don't have this, you want to import the project files textures. Okay. And then we have item text. In this case, this is our book. We're going to put the text that's inside of this book in this little text variable here. And obviously, if you had a more advanced book with like different pages and stuff, you would do this entirely different. But in this overly simplified example, we're just going to set this text variable to some text inside of this book. So for example, we could just put testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, test text inside of our book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like that. Okay, so this is essentially our item info for our item book class. All right, so that is done. We can go ahead and close that. We can actually close out of our item master for now. And what we want to do is create another child class. So we right click our item master, create a child blueprint, and this will be BP_item hatchet, just like so. Okay, so double click your BP_item hatchet, and in here we're going to set all of our item info as well as our mesh. So we can set our item mesh here to our hatchet static mesh. You know, it's a little bit small here, so we'll click R, scale this up, and we'll set the value here to something like 3, maybe 3.5, and we can actually click this browse button, and we can drag this into our scene. Okay, it looks a little bit, actually no, that's probably about the good size. And you can actually drag this up a little bit if you want it above the center of the blueprint like that. Okay, now we want to set our class defaults, item stats, our item info. So in this case, our item type is going to be of the type equipable. Our mesh is going to be hatchet. Damage, we'll set this to 120. Item name, we can name this to hatchet. Then the item icon, we can search for hatchet, T_hatchet right here. In our item text, we can just leave this blank. We're not going to be really using that in this case. So we can compile, save that. So now we can go ahead and create our last item. So go to our item master, right click, create child blueprint class, and name this to BP underscore item health potion. So in this case, our item health potion, we can double click this, set our item mesh here to health. Actually, it's just called potion. And we can scale this up a little bit, like 1, 1, 1. Maybe move this up a little bit. Click browse and drag this into our scene. Okay, that looks like a good size. So back in here, back in our item health potion, we can go to our class defaults to set our item stats. So in this case, it's going to be of the type consumable. The mesh is going to be potion. In this case, we want our health potion to restore HP. So in this case, we're going to be using the damage variable, but instead of applying damage, what we'll do is we'll apply restore health, depending on this variable. So we can restore about 30 HP. Item name, we can name this health potion. Then item icon, we can change this to potion, T underscore potion. And item text, we can ignore that. Okay, so now we've set up all three of our item classes, which are children of our BP master item. So right now, if we hit play, we can't interact with them. We can't do anything with them. They're just blueprint actors placed in our scene. There's no functionality. So what we actually want to do is when we overlap this sphere, this collision sphere, we want to enable our character the ability to pick up the actor and add it to our character's inventory. So to do that, we want to open up our BP item master, and we want to add our functionality and logic inside of our master class. The reason why we want to do this is because if we set up the base functionality of interacting with the item inside of our master class, it will propagate to all of the children classes. That way we don't have to repeat our work over for each individual class, like I said before. So in our item master class, we can actually delete these nodes. We don't need them. In here, we want to select our sphere, scroll all the way down, and we want to add this event on component begin overlap. Click the add there. Click on the sphere again and add this event and overlap. Click the plus button. So basically, when our character overlaps, we want to allow them to pick up the item. And when they leave the overlap, we want to not allow them to pick up the item. So what we can do is, off of our other actor here, cast to third person character, which in this case is our character class. And what we want to do is get player controller, drag off our return value, and type enable input. So instead of having this for the target, we want to alt disconnect that and hook this up for the player controller. For some reason it doesn't work with the target hooked up here. You want this particular one to be for the player controller. Okay, and then you want to hook up the execution graph into the enable input right there. And then for our end overlap, what we want to do is we want to, off the other actor, cast to third person character. You want to, off the get player controller, disable input. And in this case, we actually want it to be hooked up to the target. And then so we can hook this up like so and compile save. All right. So now what we want to do is add a key on our keyboard to pick up the item. So right click, add E key, scroll up here until you find the E key. And really you can use whichever key you want. I'm just going to use E. And when you press the key, you want to get off the other actor, cast to third person character, hook that up for the pressed. All right, so when we press E, what we want to do is we want to call a function inside our character to pick up the item. So we actually haven't created this function yet. So what we'll go ahead and do now is we'll go into our third person character to create that function. So over in our third person character, we can add a custom event. So you want to search for custom event, add custom event. You want to rename this to pick up item. This is a custom event. Basically, these events can be called outside of this class. In this case, we want to call it in our item class. But what we want to do is we actually want to add an input for this event. So click add new input. And what this does is it adds a variable that we can pass from this event into whatever we want. So in this case, we want to change this from Boolean to item structure. You want to rename this to item info or item stats, whichever works. Okay, and now we should be able to call this event inside of our BP item master class. So in there, off of our E cast third person character, we can drag off of here and call our pickup item event. And so for our item info, what we want to do is we want to get our item stats and hook it up to the item info. All right. So now what we are doing is we're adding the item to our character. In this case, we're calling this function and we're not actually doing anything as of yet. But what we want to do after this is we actually want to destroy the actor. That way, once we add it, we can destroy the item. Okay, and we can actually see this work right now if we hit play. If I run up to this potion, I click E, you can see we've destroyed the actor. We've technically called the add event, which doesn't do anything. But basically, we're picking up the item, we're going and overlapping the collision, which allows us to press E to pick up the item. In this case, it only destroys it as of now. So we have our basic pickup logic. Now what we actually want to do is add our third person character pickup item logic. Once we pick up an item, you want to get this item info and you want to add it to our inventory. All right, so right now what we don't have is we don't have an inventory array set up. And now is a good time to explain what an array is, and in this case, what it's going to help us with. And in this case, how it's going to help us. So if we go ahead and create a brand new variable, we're going to rename this to inventory array, and it's going to be of the type item structure, like so. And what we want to do is we want to change the variable type here. Click on this little icon. You want to change it from a single type to an array. And so a single type is just a single variable. And we also have an array, a set, and a map. In this video, I'm only going to cover arrays. In my blueprint for advanced users, I will cover the set and the map type. So right now we only want to set this to an array. So if we hit compile and save, you're going to notice down here the default value. So essentially what an array is a collection of variables. In this case, if we click this add button, you're going to see we have the item info structure. So we can actually add multiple items. And so an array is essentially a group of variables, kind of like a structure, but in this case we have an array of structures. So hopefully that makes some sense. And actually, to explain this much better, we're going to create another variable and we're going to just name this test array so that I can explain this a little bit better. And we're going to change the variable type to just a string. So what we want to do is hit compile and save. And now we're going to see this is a variable type of the type string, but instead of being a single type variable, we have an array. So in our default value, we can add multiple strings in this array. So in this case, we could add different strings, like maybe we wanted to just add some random text, test 1, test 2, test 3. So basically an array can allow us to add multiple variables, kind of like a structure, but in this case it can only be one variable type. We can't add also integers into this array. However, we can create an integer array, we just can't add two different variable types into this specific array. Demonstrate what an array actually is, we can drag our test array string here, and we can actually get and we can actually set. So first we'll go ahead and demonstrate with a get. So off of here we can drag off of here, and actually under here under the utilities array we have all of the different array functions. So kind of just like the structure, instead of breaking the structure info, what we can do for an array is we can get the array info. So in this case, we have the get function, which allows us to get from an array at our certain index. So basically, an array has an index and then the variable. The index lets us know where the variable is stored at. So in this case, our string test is stored at index 0. Then our string text1 is stored at index 1. So you might have noticed that the array actually starts at 0, 1, 2, 3. And the reason behind that is you're going to find in any programming language, pretty much any programming language has arrays start at index 0. Just keep that as a mental note. Arrays start at index 0, 1, 2, 3. So when you get from an array, you want to know the first one is always going to be 0, and the second one is actually going to be 1. So what are actually arrays useful for? Why is this important? Why is this relevant? So for example, what if I was trying to create a multiplayer game where I had a handful of characters on my server? Let's say I wanted to pick a random player name or a random spawn location. I want to pick it from an array, or in this case, a set of data variables. In the case of the player name, I can pick a random name like John, Joe, Smart Polly, and Ben. This is an array of random names basically, or in this case strings. And what we can do is add a F key. So when we press F in our third person character, we can get at index 0, and off of here we can do a print string and print what we get from our array at index 0. So if we hit play and hit F, you can see we're getting John because John is the string at index 0. So we're getting from our array get at index 0 the string, which in this case is John. So of course you can change the index to index 1. Compile, save that, and in this case it's going to get Joe. So hit play, hit F, we can see we have Joe. Then we can change this to index 2, and we can get Smart Poly, and so on. So hopefully you understand why arrays might be useful and how to get information from an array. So we have the get function from the array. We also have the, if we copy and paste this over, we have the add. So in this case, we can add to our array another name. So we could add Bob to our array name, move down our F key here. So when we press F, we add Bob to our array, and the return value is the index of the newly added item. So what we can do is we can actually drag this little bit of logic here and print the string right here and hook up the index into our get. So what this basically is doing is when we press F, we're adding an array element called Bob. So it'd just be the same exact thing as if I were to click this plus button and add another element called Bob. In this case, I don't want to do that. I want to delete that. Compile, save that. And so you can see here, we press F, we're getting our array, we're adding to the array a new entry or a new array element. Then after that, we're returning the index of where we added it. In this case, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, index 4. Then we're going to get at index 4 the string, which in this case is going to be Bob. So if we hit play, we should see Bob. So by now you know the get function and the add function. Now there are many more different functions to modify and to use with arrays. And you can see all those functions by dragging off the array, clicking under the utilities, and under array. You can see we have add, we have clear, we can see if it contains a certain item, we can find item, we can do a for each loop, we can do an insert, and much more. So I know this is a little bit brief overview of what arrays are, and I will explain hopefully more of this in another video, as well as some of the other array functions in another video. But in this case, this is sufficient enough for you to be aware that arrays exist, as well as what arrays are potentially used for. So now we can go ahead and delete all this nonsense, and we can delete our test array. All right, now we can resume what we were doing, which is we were adding an item to our item array. So if you remember correctly, when we hit play, we press E, we're picking up the item, and it's calling a function in our character, but it's actually not doing anything yet. Or it's calling this event in our character, which is not doing anything yet. In this case, we want to add the item info to our item array. So what we can do is we can actually get our array, and we can do add. So this is a really simple method of adding our item to our inventory array. So right now, if we hit play, we can hit E, and we've essentially picked up an item, added these to our inventory array. So we can't actually see that happening on our screen, but to see that happen in the back end, what we can do is we can add a print string. And then what we can do is we can do the same thing that we showed before, where we get from our inventory array. At that index, we get our item info structure. And if you remember clearly, we have to drag off of here and click break item structure to get any of our item information. So in this case, we can print out our item name into the print string so we can see which items we're adding to our inventory when we pick it up. So if we hit play, we can hit E. You can see we have a health potion. If we hit E over here, we have an old book. We hit E over here, we picked up a hatchet. So you can see we're actually picking up these items, we're adding it to our array, and then we're getting that item and printing the name to the screen. So arrays are very useful for storing data such as variables of different types. And structures are very useful for having multiple different variables. That way you can store them in arrays. So basically these are like the fundamentals of storing data inside your game in Unreal Engine. And when you guys are creating your games, you're actually going to be using this a lot when you're creating your game. Alright, so this is great and all, but what we actually want to do next is we want to create some user interface. So we actually want to display on our character's screen the item icon that they picked up so that we can see what exactly we're picking up, as well as give our character the ability to use the items. So for example, we can actually use our hatchet item and equip it to our character's hand. For our book, we can display a book text so we can read what's inside of the book. For our potion, we can restore some health to our character. Let's go ahead and create our user interface widget. So in our main here, what we want to do is right click, create a new folder, and name this widgets. And if you don't know what a widget is, it's basically the user interface that a character sees. So like a health bar, mini map, buttons, anything like that, any sort of menu, that is basically what a widget is. So we'll go ahead and right click. Under here, the very bottom, you see user interface. We're going to create a widget blueprint. And we can name this to W_main, W meaning widget. So we can double click and open this. If this is your first time using the widget editor, it's pretty simple. This is basically your screen, your computer monitor screen, where you're adding different health bars, mini maps, and things like that inside of here. Then we have all the different items that we can add, such as buttons, images, text box, health bars, and stuff like that. And then from there we have the designer mode and the graph mode. So basically we have the designer where we can create what it looks like, and the graph where we can create all the blueprint logic for like if we hit a button, what to do when we click a button, select a certain item when we enter text. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to create our inventory widget. Basically, we'll go ahead and start by searching in our palette here for a horizontal box. You see horizontal box, we'll go ahead and drag this into our screen here. And we can go ahead and scale this by dragging these little circles, and we can kind of center it like so. Alright, so next what we want to add in our horizontal box are the item icons. So first of all, we're going to go ahead and add a border. And then we'll set this to fill on the right over here. And on the border, we're going to add an image. So go ahead and type image here and drag it on top of the border. And for our border, we're actually going to select on our border here and set the padding to 5. And for our image, you want to set the padding to 10. And then we can go ahead and copy, select our border, copy, and paste on our horizontal box 2 more times so that we have these little item icons just like so. Okay, and so for the style, we want to select on the border here. We want to change the brush color to this black color right here, and we want to change the opacity to 0.5, so it's a bit of transparency. And then for the image color, we won't select the image here and change the color and opacity and change this to a grayish tint like so. And in fact, we can just delete our borders and recopy them over. So go ahead and copy, paste, paste. Okay, and the last thing we want to do is we want to select our horizontal box and select our anchors, anchor it to the bottom center like so. That way it'll scale properly. So back in our third person character blueprint, what we want to do in the event graph is go ahead and initialize our widget and add it to the screen. So we'll go ahead and add a event begin play, and we'll go ahead and get player controller and create widget. For the widget class, we're going to add our w_main. And then off of this, we're going to add to viewport. And then we want to take the return value and we actually want to promote this to a variable. And this will be our widget reference. So go ahead and drag that out and hook that up. And then compile, save that. So now if we hit play, we should be able to see our widget here on the screen. We can't actually interact and it doesn't actually do anything yet. So let's go ahead and add that functionality. So first of all, when we pick up an item, let's go ahead and add it to our widget here. So back in our widget main, in our graph, we can go ahead and select these and delete these. And we want to add a new custom event. And we can name this update image. And this custom event will have 2 different inputs. So in the details panel here under inputs, we're going to add the first one, which is an integer. This will be item index. The second one will be a texture 2D object reference, and we'll name this icon for our item icon. So basically we're going to, when we pick up an item, set this image here to the item icon, which is in our item info structure. So first, in our third person character, once we add an item, we can go ahead and get our widget reference, drag it onto our graph, click get, and call our custom event, which is update image, and hook it up like so. And then what we can do is for the item index, we can select off of here, off the add for the item index. And for the icon, we can break the item structure here and get the item icon, hook it up to the update image there. And now we just have to go to our widget main and add that functionality here. So what I'm going to do is for our item index, I'm going to do a switch on integer. And this is essentially the same as a switch on enum, but in this case we can add our own user-defined integer numbers. So we add a pin. You see we have 0, 1, and 2. And currently, if we go to our designer here, you can see we have 1, 2, 3 slots. Technically it starts from 0, so 0, 1, 2. So we have our different item indexes 0, 1, and 2. So what we want to do is for 0, index 0, we want to update image 106. So we can actually go ahead and rename this so it makes a little bit more sense. Image 01. Actually, we'll name this image 0. Rename this image 1. And rename this one to image 2. Okay, that way it matches up with our array. So we can go ahead and select image 0, get image 0. And what we want to do is set brush from texture and hook up the 0 to the set brush from texture. And for our texture, we want to drag into the item icon for the texture. And then we want to go ahead and copy the set brush from texture over again and select our image 1, hook that up for the target, hook up the 1 execution pin, and hook up the item icon for the texture. And go ahead and copy paste it one more time and hook up the number index 2 execution pin, as well as our variable image 2 and our item icon. Okay, so now if we go ahead and hit play, I'm going to press E, you're going to see nothing's happening, and that's because in our third person character, in our inventory array, if you had indexes already in here or array elements, it's not going to add it. So we go ahead and empty that like so. Just keep an empty inventory array for now. And if we hit play, we can click E. You can see we have the potion icon, E, we have the book icon, and E, we have the hatchet icon like so. So right now we can't select anything. We can only pick up items, and you can see it added to our inventory array there, as well as our inventory hotbar UI. So next, let's actually add the ability to select our items. So back in our third person character, we're going to add 2 things. So when we scroll our mouse, we're going to let our character to select certain items based on whether we scroll our mouse up or scroll our mouse down. So in our third person character, we're going to right click and add a mouse wheel up. And we're going to add a mouse wheel down. So when we scroll our mouse wheel up, we're going to select or move our cursor to a different item icon, and then we're going to move, when we select our mouse wheel down, it's going to move down, further down our hotbar. So it's going to look like we're cycling back and forth on our hotbar. So what we need to add is we actually need to add 2 different variables. So the first one will be called selected index, and this will be of the type integer. And the next one is going to be called max inventory slots, and it's going to be of the type integer. So in this case, for our max inventory slots, we can give this a default value of 3 because we only have currently 3 inventory slots on our widget. So we're going to get our selected index here, and we're going to get our max inventory slots, and we're going to check and see if these are equal to each other. And if so, we're going to add a branch off of the pressed here. So we're going to see if our selected inventory is equal to our max slots. If so, we don't want to do anything because this is mouse wheeled up, but mouse wheeled down, what we want to do is we actually want to do something off of that. So in this case, what we want to do for false is we want to get the selected index, and we're going to increment off of the false. Okay, and I'll show you guys what I'm doing here real quick. So we can do a print string off of here, and we can take the integer into the string so you can see what's happening. Okay, so if I hit play here, scroll your mouse wheel up, you're going to see it increment all the way up to 3. So we can do that again, 1, 2, 3. So basically what this is doing is it's taking our selected index and seeing if it's equal to our max inventory slots of 3. If not, we can increment it once and then do it again. If we wheel up again, we can increment it again all the way up until 3. Okay, so this will allow us to cycle through our hotbar 1, 2, and 3, just like that. Then we will obviously want to be able to scroll backwards, which is our mouse wheel down. So to do that, we can get our selected index and check and see if this is equal to 0. Because 0 is the first index in our array. Then we can add a branch off of our pressed here. And if so, if it's at the bottom, we can get our selected index and increment integer off of the false. And we can do a print string to also see what that does. Take the integer into the string, compile, save, and if we hit play, now if we scroll, you can see 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 0. So you can see we can scroll all the way up, 1, 2, 3, all the way down. Okay. And so now what we can do is we can actually allow ourselves to see this happen on our hotbar. So when we scroll 0, 1, 2, we can highlight this border around the items. Okay, so to do that in our w_main, our widget, and our graph, we can add another function. We can call this add custom event select item function. And the only thing we need for our input is an integer, and it's called item index. Okay, so the same thing what we did here is we're going to do a switch on int. So off of here we can do a switch on integer, and we can add 3 different pins like so. And then what we want to do is we want to take the borders, and we actually don't have the borders as variables. So we go back in our designer here, select on the border, you're going to see here is a variable. And so if you actually check mark this box here, it's going to allow us to, in the graph, use the border as a variable. So that will allow us to change the color, the opacity, and whatnot in the blueprint graph. So real quick, I'm going to rename this border to border 0. Second one to border 1. And the third one here to border 2. And we want to check is variable for all 3 of those. Now in our graph here, we can take border 1, and we want to set brush color. Okay, and hook that up from 0 to there. And we want to change the brush color here to something like yellow. So we can see that's been highlighted like so. We can go ahead and copy and paste this over twice and hook up border 1, border 2, and then execution pin 1 and execution pin 2. So now all we have to do is call this custom event inside our third person character. So when we do a mouse wheel up, we want to get our widget reference and do select item function and hook up the item index into there like so. Then we can copy this over for our mouse wheel down and hook up the index as well as the execution pin like so. So now if we click play, we can see we are selecting the items. And right now you see there's a bug. When we move up and down, it actually doesn't deselect an item. So it doesn't set the color back to normal. It just sets it to yellow. So we can update that if we go back into our graph here. A very simple fix. All we need to do is before we set the brush color to yellow, we want to set the previous borders back to the gray default color. So we can go ahead and select all these set brush colors. and Control C, Control V to copy. For our brush color here, we want to set this back to the gray value that we had, which was something like this. Actually, we can go back in our designer, select our border here, and click on a brush color. It's full black with a 0.5 opacity. So if we go back in our graph, select our brush color, we can set this to full black with opacity of 0.5. Click OK. Then we can go ahead and Control C, Control V, copy and paste these. So if you remember, we need to set the other borders to this transparent color before setting them to a yellow color. So in this case, for border 0, we want to get border 1 and 2 and set them to this color. And hook up the execution pins like so. And then for border 1 here, we want to get border 2 and 0. And hook these up like so. And for border 2, we want to get border 0 and 1 and hook these up like so. So now, if we hit play, we can cycle between all 3 of these. And you're seeing it's setting it yellow, but it's also resetting the color back to normal when we cycle through the different indexes. So basically what we've created is a simple mouse wheel up that sets this integer value between a range of 0 and 3, and it adds whenever we mouse wheel up, and it subtracts every time we mouse wheel down. And it also binds to this function on our widget to change the color of our border here to show that we've either selected the item with this yellow bar or we've deselected it. And of course we can pick up our item, and right now it does not pick up to the item that we have selected, so we can go ahead and actually fix that. We can also add the ability to use an item at our selected index. So for example, if I select my hatchet here, I click on it, we can add an equip, or if I click on my health potion, we can add a use function where we use the item and restore our health. So first off, let's go ahead and create our add item function. So right now, if you remember, we have our pickup item added to the array and all this good stuff. Right now, for this particular tutorial, what we want to actually do is we want to, instead of adding it to an array, right now our character could technically add as many more items as they wanted to. There is no current limit on their inventory. So what we actually want to do is we want to create a function that will limit and control how many items the player can equip and so on. So this is a good time right now to introduce you guys to functions if you haven't already learned about them. Basically, you have the ability to create functions here if you click this plus button. So we're going to create our first function called add item. So a function basically has inputs and outputs, and it allows us to kind of clean up our graph and put all of this functionality inside of our function. So we can actually take all this, Control X, and in our add item we Control V and hook this up like so. And what we actually want to do is take our item structure here and drag it onto our add item. And basically what that did is it added a input here for our item structure. And of course you could always click this add an input or clear like so. So right now we're doing the same logic but inside of our function. And to call this particular function, all we need to do is select our function here, drag it onto the graph, hook up the execution pin, and hook up the item info structure like so. Now we actually don't want to do the same logic here. We want to modify this because, for example, when we pick up an item, we want to pick it up at our selected index. So if I had the book selected, I wanted to actually swap out the item I have for that hatchet at my selected index, if that makes sense. So in our add item function, we can go ahead and do that advanced logic in here. So let's go ahead and delete all this so we can start fresh. So what we want to do is first select your inventory array. We're going to add 3 indexes. And this is going to allow us to set a cap on how many items we can have in the inventory. In this case, we only have 3 different slots. And what we want to do is, instead of adding to our inventory array, we want to set the array element. So if we get our array, we can go ahead and do what is called a set array element. So this function, set array element. So we can hook this up like so. What we want to do here is drag our item info to the item structure right here. And we also want to get our selected index into the index like so. So right now, if I hit play, I can add my selected index. And right now we are forgetting to also update our user interface. So we want to get our widget reference here and call our update image function custom event. And for the icon, we want to break item info. What we can do is only select our item icon here, hook that up for the icon, and for the item index, we can get our selected index and hook that up like so. So now if we hit play, we can add items at whatever index we have. And this will also allow us to replace items. So if I hit E here at index 0, it's going to replace that item at that particular index. And this is all happening through the set array element. So because we have these array elements right here, which are technically blank, we are setting that particular array element to this item info from our item pickup. So hopefully I haven't confused you in any way. If so, leave a comment down below and hopefully I can explain it further. But instead of using the add to our inventory array, we're using the set array element function, which is a handy tool for giving you more control over your array of values. So now up next, what we want to do next is we want to actually allow our character to swap out different items. So when I pick up an item and swap it out for a different one, I want to respawn the item in the world or drop it back into the world. So we can do that by going back into our third person character add item function. And before we go any further here, we actually want to add the last variable in our item structure that I was talking about earlier. So back in our content browser, item structure, double click to open that. Down here at the bottom, we want to add a new variable. And for the variable type, we're going to search here BP underscore item master. Set of object reference, we want to do a class reference. And for the name, we want to name this to class ref. So what a class reference allows us to do is, back in our third person character here, we can do the node spawn actor from class. And so this will allow us to spawn the actor. In this case, it'll be whatever item we have. We can respawn the item by the type of class that we have set for the reference. Now what we want to do is basically we want to do some additional logic. So before we add an item to our inventory, we want to check and see if there is currently an item in that inventory slot. So for example, if I have an item in here, technically we have this empty item, but we want to check and see if it has a valid class reference in here. If so, we can either swap the item or we can add the item. So first of all, get our inventory array. You want to get a copy at our selected index. And then we want to break the item structure, and we want to expand this, and you want to get class reference and see is valid class. So basically we want to check and see if this is a valid class, and if our inventory array here, if you expand the index, you can see these are not valid class references here. So technically, if we were to get our index at this item array here, it's going to return false. So we're going to add a branch and hook that up for the condition. Okay, so if it returns false, this means that we do not have an item, a valid item in that inventory slot. So that means there's no valid class reference. If so, what we want to do is we want to replace the item with this new item that we have. So we want to do a spawn actor from class for the true, and the class reference will be the class reference from our previous item, and then we want to hook up the end here to our set array element so that we can then add the new item to our array. One last thing, we actually need to hook up the new item structure to this break item structure, just like so. And of course we need to add a spawn transform. So spawn transform, we want to tell our character where to spawn the item. And to do this, what I'm going to do is add a arrow component right here in front of the character so that we can spawn her item in front of the character at all times right in front. So go ahead and select your mesh, add a component, and search for arrow. So we can just take this arrow right here and move this forward, up, rotate it 90 degrees, and put it like so right in front of the character. And then in our add item function, what we want to do is we want to drag our arrow, get world location, and then off of our spawn transform, we want to right click, split the pin structure. So this will split the transform, which will expose all three vectors. And then we want to hook up the world location to our spawn transform location, compile, save that, and we should be able to see the results by hitting play. So if we hit E and select our potion here, and if we hit E again, it's going to swap the items. And you're seeing it's not actually spawning the item, and that's because we forgot to do one extra step, which is to set the valid class reference for each of our item infos. So if you go to your blueprints item book, for example, if we go to our open full blueprint editor, class defaults, item stats, you're going to see here we didn't set any of the class references. And for the class references, all we need to do is set a reference to the self. So in this case, BP item book is BP item book. And then BP item hatchet, you can actually edit it in here. Class reference here is BP item hatchet, like so. And then for our last item, BP item health potion, you want to change the class reference to BP item health potion, compile, save that. So now if we hit play, we can hit E here, select our health potion and hit E again. You can see we're having a little bug there Alright, and I just realized one mistake was you actually need to take the new item here, structure, and hook it up to the set array element for the item here, or else it won't work. So now if you've done this all right, we hit play, press E, select the health potion there, press E, you're going to see we've just spawned the item, and basically we've spawned, someone is working. What we need to do is we actually need to set the array element after this by hooking it up like so. That way we can set the array element that we pick up and drop it, swap it like so. So you can see we can switch this to the book, the hatchet, potion. What we can do next is add physics here for items. So if you select the BP item master, select the item mesh here, just click simulate physics. This will add for a better look. So I can select this item, press E, you see it swaps it, drops it out of the sky like so. Okay, so E, switch for a hatchet, pick up a potion here, switch it out for a book, pick up the potion here. So you can see here we have very basic swap in and out of our items and respawning the item based on the class that is set in each item class, as well as in this structure here. You can use it to respawn the item actor. Now what we want to go ahead and do next is, based on the item that we have selected, we want to actually add the functionality to use that item. So if you remember, we have this item type enumeration. So based on this item type, we can do certain logic like equip, read, and use. So what we want to do is we want to add another function now, which is called use item. So this use item will have one input, which is the item info. So go ahead and add a new input and name this to item struct and item info like so. Now we can go back into our event graph and add a left mouse button. So when we have our left mouse button, we're going to call our use item like so. And then what we want to do is we want to get our inventory array, do a get at our selected inventory index, and hook up the item info to our use item function. So when we click left mouse button, it will get our inventory array, get the item at the selected index that we have. So in here, what we want to do is we want to break item structure, and then off of our item type, we want to do a switch on item enum and hook up the execution pin like so. So now we can do, based on our item type, we can do consumable function, equipable function, or readable function. In this case, we want to create all three of these functions. So we'll go ahead and first create our consume item function, then our equip item, and then our read item. So the consume item will have the item structure, item info as input. And we have the equip item will also have the item structure as item info input. Same with the read item. Technically, you could just duplicate these functions if you wanted to. That way you didn't have to add those inputs. All right, so now that we've created all three of our functions, what we can do is drag our consume item, equip item, and read item function into our use item function. So technically you can put different functions inside of a function. So it allows you to have a lot of flexibility, honestly, on where you can call your functions, as well as how you can keep your blueprint graph more organized. So we can hook up the consumable to the consume, equipable to the equip, readable to the read. Then we can also hook up the item info for all three of these like so. Compile, save that. So in our consume item, this will be for our health potion. So to see what's happening, we can do a break structure. And in this case, we want to use the damage. So if you remember for our health potion, BP health potion here, we added 30 damage, which technically is going to mean 30 HP. That is going to restore for our character. So what we can do is add a simple print string. And technically you could print out the item damage to see how much health that you've regenerated. But instead of doing this, what we want to do is we want to add a new variable. This will be the type float. This will be our health. Okay, and we can set our health to a value of 100 HP. And now what we can do is we can get our health and set our health. Actually, we want to set our health to maybe 10%. That way we can actually restore health back to our character. What we want to do is we want to get our health and subtract it by our damage right here. And then before we set our health, what we want to do is we want to do a clamp float, and the min and maximum will be 100, minimum will be 0. Hook that up to the set function like that, and hook up the execution pin. So the reason why we're doing a clamp is we don't want to have our player to be able to go higher than 100 HP, like so. And then we can also do a print string and hook up the health value into the string so we can see what's going on. So now if we hit E, we can select the health potion and press left click. See, we start with 0. And technically it's not doing anything because we accidentally did subtract instead of add. So instead of that, we can do add the damage, which is technically the health potion, into the value there. So if we hit play, we equip that, select it, press 1, 40, 70, and then 100. So we can actually bind this to a health bar, and that is very easy to do. I'll show you how to do that real quick. If we go back to our main widgets, w_main, we can add a simple progress bar to our screen and scale this up like so. We can select our anchor and anchor it to the bottom left. And then what we can do is under the progress here, you can see the percentage. So this percentage drives the progress bar like so. What we can do is we can click this bind, create a binding, and this will create a function right here that will allow us to bind this to a certain variable. In this case, we want to bind it to our health variable. So we can do this by right click, get owning player pawn. And this will basically get our character. And then we can do a cast to third person character. So this will allow us to get a reference to our character. And then from here we can get health. And technically you could hook this up, but it's not going to work because this is a value from 0 to 100, whereas this is a percentage. So we actually want to take our health value and convert it to a percentage. To do that, we just multiply the health by 0.01, and that will convert it to a percentage there, and we can hook it up like so. So now if we hit play, you're going to see our health bar has 10% base HP. We equip our potion, we select it, click left click, you can see we have 40, 70, and then 100 HP just like so. Now one more thing is we can actually spam this health potion over and over, and it won't actually remove the health potion from our hotbar. So we want to make this a one use only health potion. That way we have to pick up more health potions to restore our health. So one way that we could do that is back in our third person character, in our consume item, we can remove this item array, or in this case what we want to do is we want to get our inventory array, set array element at our selected index, and basically we're going to set it to nothing. That way it's essentially removing the item from our inventory. So if we hit play, equip that item, click on it, you see we added 40 HP, and you can see nothing is happening because it's not allowing it. We actually remove the item from our inventory, but you can see we still have the item icon on our widget, so that means we still need to update our widget icon. So to do that, we want to add a new, back in the graph here, event graph. We want to add a custom event called remove image. So this will basically set our image back to normal, or remove the item icon from our hotbar when we consume the item. So here we'll add another input of the type integer and name this item index. Compile, save that. Then we'll do a switch on integer and add 3 indexes like we did before. And basically for remove image, all we want to do is copy paste these, set brush from texture from our update image, and hook all these up. But instead of having a texture reference, we can just leave that blank. So basically that will remove the item icon like so. In this case, we only have the used item for our potion, so we can go ahead and duplicate these a couple times. And I'm just alt dragging to duplicate this. You could also Control C, Control V to copy it. But now we have 3 different health potions. We can pick these up, consume one, pick up another one, consume that one, pick up a last one, consume that one like so. So basically that is a very simple consume item function, where when we are pressing our left mouse button, we're doing our use item function, switch on the item type enumeration, and then we're doing a consume item where we're basically adding this to our health, and we're removing the item from our inventory, as well as removing the item from our hotbar. Next up, what we want to do is we want to add our equip item function. So what we want to do here is first break our structure, and what we want to do is we want to attach the hatchet mesh to our character's hand. So we can do that by adding first a static mesh component, and this will be weapon, and then we can get our weapon and do an attach component to component, the weapon to our mesh component, and then we also want to set our weapon mesh. So I want to set static mesh to the mesh of our item info right there. So we can hook these up like so. And right now we don't have a socket name, so we need to go ahead and set that up. So if we go into our mannequin character mesh SK mannequin, we can dock this window at the top, and basically a socket allows us to attach certain items to our characters, so like a helmet, a hat, a weapon, a sword. And this is a skeletal mesh, basically a character that has different bones. So what you want to do is go ahead and find the hand R, right click and add a socket. So you see here hand R socket, double click that. We're going to rename this to weapon socket. And you want to make sure you spell this. It's caps lock sensitive, so make sure that you remember the name that you put in here. So back in our character here, we can rename this socket name here to weapon socket. Then for location, you want to snap the target, rotation, snap the target, and snap the target. So first, we actually need to adjust the socket. So if we right click, add a preview mesh, hatchet, you're going to see it's really tiny. So what we need to do is actually adjust the scaling and rotation. So we'll go ahead and rotate this 90 degrees, move this around, click R to scale. So it's got the basic controls as the normal viewport in Unreal Engine. And we can do it something like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so now if we hit play, we should be able to click on our hatchet and equip it to our character. So one thing you might notice is if I try and pick up a potion, I still have the hatchet equipped to my hand. So we can actually fix that by adding a simple dequip function, which will make sure that we remove the hatchet from our hand before spawning the other item. So we can go to our add item here, move this stuff over like that, and get our item type into equals. You can see here we have equal enum. So this is very useful. So basically on your different item type, we can do and check and see if it's equal to the equipable enumeration. Then we can click B or add a branch. And off of the true, we can hook this up. So basically if it is equipable, and if it is a valid class, what we want to do is we want to call a custom event called dequip item, or a custom function called dequip item. So we'll go ahead and create a new function called dequip item. And the only thing that's going to do is we're going to get our weapon, set static mesh to null, basically no reference. So back in our add item, what we can do is call this dequip item function, hook this up into the true, and for our false, we just hook it up to the spawn actor like so. Okay, so now if I equip an item here and left click it to equip my hatchet, I can pick up a potion. You see it removes or sets the static mesh in my hand to nothing. So again, we can go ahead and repick this hatchet up, re-equip it. And of course, we can pick up a potion and drink it like so. So now we have our simple hatchet, equip, and potion, health potion. Now all we have to do is add our book item, which in this case, we want to add text to our screen that we can read. So this is a very simple one. All we need to do is go to our third person character read item function, And in this case, what we want to do is actually add our widget. In our designer, we want to add a book widget. And there actually is no really book widget. What we want to do is add a vertical box and scale it to about this size. Want to anchor it to the middle. And then in the vertical box, we want to add a multi-line text box to our vertical box. Select that and click fill. And then we can add some default text here like test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we can expand the style here. We want to make the font larger, size 20, and compile, save that, it'll update the text. And for our font color, we want to actually change the font color foreground here to white so we can actually read what we're doing. And then for our multi-line, this is make sure the variable is checked. In our graph, what we want to do is add a couple things. We want to add custom event called open book. And what this will do is we'll add a input of the type text. And it'll be the book text. So what we'll do is we'll get our multi-line editable text box and set text, and down here set text, hook up our book text like so, and then we actually want to make this set visibility to visible. And before we do anything, we want to go to our designer and go to our multi-line text box and set the visibility to hidden. So down at the very bottom, we want to just set this to hidden. That way we can't see it by default. So now if we go back into a third person character, we can get our widget reference and do open book. And for our text, we can break the item info and hook up our item text like so. So now if we go back to our play, we can press E, left click, and you can see we have our book text. Now one thing you might notice is there's no way currently to hide the book. So what we could do is if we click again on our book, we can make it hide, or you can make the escape button, make the book text hide, whatever you want to do. In this case, I'm just going to make it so once you click again, it will hide the book. So this is very simple. All we need to do is before we read our item, we want to add a boolean, and this will be named book is book open ? So we can go ahead and get is the book open and do a branch. So first we're going to check and see, is the book open? If so, we want to hide the book. If not, we want to open the book. So we need to add another function in our W widget main called add custom event. This will be called hide book. Okay, and basically what we're doing is we're going to set the visibility of our text box here to hidden. Compile, save that, and back in our third person character, we can copy our widget reference over and do the hide book event. And actually we want to reverse these, so Alt click these. If the book is not open, we want to open it. If the book is open, we want to hide it. And then of course we want to set our is book open to true, copy paste is open, and set this to false. So now if we hit play, we can show our book is open and our book is closed. Very simple. So now we have our health potion, our book text, and our simple hatchet equipable, all set up using blueprints, structures, enumerations, and arrays. So yeah, anyways, that is the simple inventory system, just a very basic, bare bones system teaching you how to use custom enumerations, custom structures, arrays, how to modify information within the array, and also kind of how to wrap that around your game using user interface like widgets. Anyways, I hope you guys were able to learn something in this video, and I hope I didn't confuse you in any way. Now, I will be making a follow-up tutorial called Blueprint for Intermediate Users, where we're going to talk about some more advanced topics such as blueprint interfaces, data tables, line traces, and more. So guys, stay tuned for that. But yeah, like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for more future tutorials. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.